Breaking news reports confirm a devastating tragedy at Statesville Regional Airport in North Carolina earlier today. According to current information, 7 individuals were killed in an aircraft accident, and reports suggest the victims include former NASCAR driver Greg Biffle, his wife, and their 2 children. Typically, I refrain from creating content surrounding breaking aviation accidents immediately after they occur because factual information is often scarce and speculation can be harmful. However, this particular incident hits very close to home for me, which is why I felt compelled to provide this immediate update to walk you through the verified facts we have so far. To begin our analysis, let's look at the preliminary data provided by the Aviation Safety Network. The aircraft involved in this catastrophic event was a Cessna Citation II business jet. For those unfamiliar with this airframe, I am showing you an image of the aircraft type now for reference. There is currently a discrepancy regarding the number of victims. While the Aviation Safety Network lists 6 fatalities, major news outlets are currently reporting 7 deaths. Preliminary reports indicate that the jet encountered an issue shortly after departure and was attempting to return to the airfield, specifically targeting runway 28. While the exact nature of the problem remains unknown at this stage, we will analyze the flight data momentarily to look for clues. Tragically, the aircraft failed to reach the runway. It collided with the terrain short of the threshold, careened across a road, breached the airport perimeter fence, and finally came to a halt on the runway, where a post-crash fire erupted. One significant detail noted immediately is that the aircraft's airspeed was fluctuating wildly during the event. Before we dive deep into the telemetry and flight data, it is crucial to understand the environmental context, specifically the weather conditions at Statesville Regional Airport this morning. Looking at the weather history for the area, conditions were visual flight rules or VFR earlier in the morning, with ceilings around 5,000 feet and visibility extending to 10 miles. These favorable conditions existed roughly between 9:35 a.m. and 9:55 a.m. local time. Although initial reports placed the crash time at 10:32 a.m., the NTSB flight data suggests the accident likely occurred earlier, around 10:15 a.m. local time. The critical factor here is the rapid deterioration of the weather. At 9:55 a.m., it was VFR, but by 10:15 a.m., conditions had dropped to marginal VFR with only 5 miles of visibility and ceilings lowering to 200 feet. By 10:35 a.m., the situation had worsened significantly to just 1.75 miles of visibility with 1,000-foot ceilings. Additionally, rain showers and scattered clouds at 400 feet were present, meaning that within a short 30-minute window, the weather went from manageable to potentially dangerous right as the flight was departing. This weather analysis is vital because it raises the question of what type of flight plan the crew filed prior to takeoff. It is entirely possible they departed under VFR rules based on the earlier clear weather, but given how quickly conditions went downhill, I suspect and certainly hope that they checked the forecast and filed an Instrument Flight Rules or IFR plan. If they were on an IFR plan, they would have been in communication with air traffic control immediately after becoming airborne. However, it is worth noting that Statesville Regional is a non-towered airport, meaning they could have received their IFR clearance on the ground, though we cannot confirm that yet. There are still many unknowns in this investigation, and I have not yet had access to any ATC audio recordings, so I want to avoid speculating on the communications aspect. Instead, I want to focus our attention on the hard flight data, as this provides an objective set of facts we can analyze without guessing at the cause of this tragedy. I have imported the flight data from NTSB Exchange into the Flysto software to visualize the aircraft's performance. The data shows they departed from runway 10 at 1507 Zulu, which corresponds to 10:07 a.m. local time. Immediately upon departure, they initiated a left-hand turn, and initially everything appeared to be a standard departure profile, with a normal turnout. However, things start to look unusual as they reach an altitude of 2,200 feet mean sea level MSL, which is approximately 1,267 feet above ground level. Right after reaching this peak, the aircraft begins an unexpected descent. Tracking this data point, we can see they dropped significantly, getting as low as 600 feet above the ground. This is highly irregular. They climbed to roughly 1,250 feet AGL during the turn, and then inexplicably descended to nearly half that altitude. We do not know the reason for this altitude loss. It could have been a mechanical issue they were troubleshooting, or perhaps an emergency situation. Alternatively, if they departed VFR, they might have ducked down to stay clear of the lowering cloud layers while trying to pick up an IFR clearance. Since we lack definitive answers, I will not speculate further on the intent behind this maneuver. Following this descent, the data shows they began to climb again, and I want to play this segment in real time so you can observe the behavior. Looking at the vertical speed indicator, which shows the rate of climb, they are initially ascending at about 1,000 feet per minute. Suddenly, the profile becomes erratic again, and they begin another descent with the vertical speed dropping to negative 832 feet per minute. This suggests a potential controllability issue or a struggle to maintain altitude. As the aircraft fluctuates wildly from a descent of nearly 900 feet per minute to a sudden aggressive climb of 4,500 feet per minute, the climb rate eventually spikes to an extreme 6,600 feet per minute. At this specific moment, viewing from the cockpit perspective, they are 2,800 feet above the ground. A climb rate of 6,600 feet per minute is exceptionally aggressive for this type of aircraft. The data indicates a ground speed of 157 knots, but remember that ground speed differs from the indicated airspeed the pilots would see. The aircraft reaches its apex for the entire flight at this point, hitting 4,500 feet MSL, or roughly 3,600 feet above the ground. As they begin a left-hand turn here, presumably to return to the airport, the situation becomes even more alarming. Watch the vertical speed during this turn. They enter a steep dive with a descent rate nearing 5,000 feet per minute while banking. This is an incredibly aggressive and dangerous maneuver, especially if they were navigating through clouds or poor visibility. Even in clear VFR conditions, descending at 5,000 feet per minute while turning is extreme. What makes this even more baffling is that mere seconds later, the aircraft transitions from that massive descent back into a steep climb of almost 4,000 feet per minute. This erratic roller coaster profile suggests the platform was not stable, raising questions about whether the pilots were fighting flight control failures or spatial disorientation. As the aircraft points back toward the airfield, my professional instinct suggests the crew had made the decision to get on the ground immediately to resolve whatever critical emergency they were facing. They climb back up to 3,100 feet MSL, roughly 2,000 feet above the ground, before initiating yet another descent. Zooming out to look at the flight path, it appears they are attempting to set up for a downwind leg to land on runway 28, effectively landing in the opposite direction of their takeoff. Given the light wind conditions, landing in the opposite direction would not typically be a major issue. However, their positioning is problematic. They are extremely close to the runway, setting up for a very tight approach pattern. Analyzing their altitude on this downwind leg just before the turn, they are at 850 feet above the ground, possibly dipping below the cloud layer. They then dive further to about 400 feet above the ground, which is dangerously low for a jet aircraft on a downwind leg. We do not know if weather forced them this low, but being at 400 feet while abeam the runway is far from a standard approach profile. I have rewound the simulation to show you the cockpit point of view as they approach the airport environment. You can see the runway coming into view as they make a right-hand turn, likely adjusting their spacing because they realized they were too tight to the landing strip. During this maneuver, the rate of descent hits 1,400 feet per minute, while they are only 600 feet above the ground. They descend through 500 feet and bottom out around 400 feet AGL. That small correction turn to the right strongly indicates they were trying to buy room to make the final turn. Furthermore, their speed is 172 knots. While I am not type-rated in the Citation II, that speed seems excessive for being on a downwind leg at such a low altitude. Being at 350 feet AGL, flying fast and being tight to the runway, is a recipe for disaster. As they turn away, the airspeed begins to bleed off and the vertical profile momentarily stabilizes around 450 feet. They slow to 160 knots and begin the final left-hand turn to align with runway 28. As they bank left, they initiate a shallow descent from 500 feet, and the airspeed continues to decay, finally entering a more normal range for an approach. The runway appears in sight, and for a brief moment it looks like the recovery might be successful, although they are still quite low at 500 feet. Pausing the data here, we see them at 100 knots and 450 feet above the ground, with the runway ahead. There are some final airspeed fluctuations visible, which could be data errors from the NTSB signal or actual aircraft performance issues. The flight data terminates shortly after this point. Again, I must emphasize that I do not want to speculate on the definitive cause of this crash. My goal was simply to highlight the inconsistencies in the flight profile, specifically the erratic vertical speeds and the aggressive maneuvering to help us understand the complexity of the situation. We simply do not know if this was a mechanical failure, a medical emergency, or a weather-related loss of control. This uncertainty underlines the importance of waiting for the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) to conduct their full investigation and release the verified data. Once that official report is released, we can return to this topic for a comprehensive debrief to learn exactly what went wrong. The one undeniable fact we have is that this is a heartbreaking tragedy resulting in the loss of 7 lives, including an entire family right before the Christmas holiday. I know this analysis cannot answer every question, but I hope it has provided some clarity on the events as we understand them now. Thank you for watching, and I appreciate your continued support.